Welcome back to Alice Customs Project Car TV. Today we've got a new project for you. This was probably going to be fairly short, although we've got to order parts, so who knows how long that'll take. But it's a Ford Lightning pickup. Yes, it's an original. Been turned into a drag truck. We're taking it another step down that road. So from what I understand from the gentleman that owns it, it's been sitting about 3 years in its current condition, and he wants to run a 2915 Mickey Thompson street slick, or whatever you want to call those. What it's here for is a 4-link and all that's associated with that. We're going to be swapping it over to a Ford 9-inch at the same time. We need to have the 9-inch narrowed, so that's part of what I've got to do, is figure out exactly what width we can get away with. Then get all these parts ordered, semi-assemble this back together somewhere, get it out of the way until the parts show up. And getting it out of the way might be as much as roll it in and out of the shop 60 times, who knows. The ultimate plans, which I hope we'll eventually get to see, is a Coyote-based twin-turbo 1700-ish horsepower truck. He's only running a 10-point cage, and I think that means you're limited to $899. I don't remember that exactly, or I haven't looked it up, but that's just off of memory. So anyway, kind of a cool truck. Kind of disheartening to me to see a Lightning SVT torn down to this level, but hey, not my truck, not my money. Anyway, what you're going to see from me is we got to get the bed off and start getting some measurements. So I thought I would share what I'm measuring and what we're trying to accomplish. Maybe you're trying to do something similar, whether it's for drag racing or for autocrossing or whatever, just trying to figure out what dimensions you've got room to work with. So in our case, we have the tires and the wheels that he wants to run, and we just need to get them under the bodywork. He doesn't want to cut the bodywork, and he doesn't want the truck having to be jacked up so high to clear the bodywork, which currently that's kind of the problem, is the rear axle is really not quite centered under the bed, left to right, and when the truck would squat, the tires try and hit the fenders. So we're going to try and make a plan for that. I do know he's going to have to cut the wheel wells out of the inside of the bed, or I'll have to cut them, whatever, to make this all work. But let's take a look back there. Okay, so I've got the bed off now, and I've spent the better part of about 2 hours getting measurements for everything under here so that we can eliminate the current leaf spring ladder bar suspension. We're going to be doing a 4-link, and it's going to be a parallel 4-link with a wishbone, all on a 9-inch rear axle. So all of this is going away. I believe we're going to be taking out this cross member to where they can mount the fuel cell in here as well. I basically have measured using the back of the cab mounted on the frame, good and tight, good solid. That is a reference point, and I've used the back of the frame rail as a reference point. And then I've used the eyelet for the front of the leaf spring as a reference point. And that way I could find the center of the axle, I could find axle height from the floor, I could find just all the measurements, where the cross member is, how wide the frame is in different locations, and I've written all that, basically drawn it out, written it all out. Then I got a measurement for the width of the axle tube, because you're going to need to know a lot of times what half that is so that you can find center of your wheel. After working with the frame for a while, I lowered the bed down. I taped a couple of plumb bobs on each side of the inside of the fender well at the location that is going to contact the tire first. With that information in place, on both sides, the plumb bob is then, that mark is transferred to the concrete, and I pulled a measurement, and then I also just held my tape measure here and let the plumb bob settle, and I got a measurement of 76¼ inches inside to inside, as if the tire was going to touch the fender well. Okay, so as you can probably imagine, I don't want the sidewall of the tire to actually touch the inside of the fender wells when he's racing or whatever and we blow out a tire. So I've also gone then from my 86.25 inch, I've subtracted 3/4 of an inch on each side to give me some clearance for the tire to clear up into the wheel well and for the tire to grow a little bit. One more number I got, which you can see these two pieces of 2x4, one on each side, that was able to get me an inside to inside measurement of what we currently have for these tires, yet they're smaller. We have back spacing such that the tire is pulled in a little more than our other wheels will do. Now the other wheels will not bolt to this axle. The owner's also changing the bolt pattern on the rear of the truck just to get him a more common wheel choice. So with this number being 78.75 and the inside to inside on our wheel well being 76.25, the tires hung out by over an inch on each side. And that's one of the things we're curing with a narrowed rear axle. So the next thing is to pull the other wheels that he wants to run on the truck and measure this axle face to face. So we've got to take these tires off and then measure the back spacing on the new wheels. And then we can calculate what the face to face surface needs to be, measurement needs to be for the new axle. And with those numbers and an estimate of where we want to put our parallel links and the fact that we'll measure and see if we have enough room to decide whether we're going to put the parallel links on the outside of the frame or whether they're going to have to go on the inside of the frame. Stability wise, they would be better to the outside just because you have a wider suspension track so that the truck's going to be a little more stable. But if that's not going to leave room, then we'll go immediately to the inside of the frame rails, and then we'll have to rework this cross member at the front and then just box as much of the frame as we need to get to another cross member where we can add good strength into the frame. The frame is a two-piece frame, and it's actually sectioned just up here in front of where the leaf spring mounts. So ideally we want to be in that same area. Let me show you that. So you might be able to see it right here, but there's a frame joint right here and it's riveted together. So with our parallel front leaf mounts, we really want to be in this section, either inside or outside, so that we're on the beefiest part of the chassis and not relying on 4, 5, 6 rivets to provide that strength. And then, like I said, we'll box in a portion of the chassis till we get, there's another cross member here, and you know, if we need to, we can go a little further, but just to make sure that that's good and strong. Okay, so I'm going to pull the other tires out. We'll get a back spacing measurement, get a jack out, get these tires off the truck. We'll start with some more measuring. So it's a couple days later, and I have just pushed this thing outside, power washed all the filth and dirt off that I could get to at least. And now I've got it sitting in here on a set of jack stands. I got them at the back, middle, front, and I've got left to right I have the frame level, and then front to back the owner wants a little bit of rake when the truck is sitting at his ride height. We've established what that angle is, set that, verified we're still and then we've got it to establish that with everything on jack stands, because the front frame rail, or the middle of the body here behind me, it's so close to the ground I couldn't get my jack stands under it at their lowest height. So what I ended up doing was raising the truck up, setting it on those jack stands, then establishing the angle, the rake that he wants built into the frame or into the suspension, and then putting jack stands at the back corners and the front corners to make all that tight. So the front ones are some screw type jack stands, so you can really adjust everything and minutely, and that let me basically leave the middle as kind of a pivot point, and then the rear I got the height to the height I wanted with the jack stand, and then just tighten everything up with the ones on the front. And you could do it if I had another set of large screw type jack stands for the rear, that would work great back here too, but all the ones I have that are big enough to do that job are under the C10 frame over here behind me. So we've got about 14 or 15 sets or jack stands in use right now. I guess be an even number, so 14 or 16. Anyway, doesn't matter. What we've got is the frame established where it's going to be, and we have a measurement that the frame height would be from the ground, so we'll get our variable, which is a couple inches, to get it to this height, and then we'll just subtract that or add it to all of our measurements depending on what we're measuring from and where to. And the next thing we need to do is to start pulling all of the suspension off. Then we're going to need to put a temporary cross member across the back of the frame, and probably another one up here close to the cab. We'll just tack weld those onto the frame, and then we can cut out the extra frame members, cut all the rivets on all this other stuff, and drop all of this and get it a clean frame. Because one of our first steps is we're going to need to box the frame rails, at least from this forward cross member under the cab, back past where we're doing our suspension mounts. And it's a 4-link, which will be on the inside of the frame rail, so it'll be right in this area is what we're planning, but it's on the inside of the frame rail, so we need all that boxed out. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to get the levels out of the way, pull the wiring, pull the brake line, clean up as much as I can, and then we'll have all that stowed under the way, tack weld a couple cross members in, and go to town on getting all this other stuff out. What you've seen is we stripped the suspension out from under here. Of course, we already had all our measurements, so we've stripped that out. I've started knocking rivets off, and then I just take a flap wheel and kind of just polish off the metal so that some of them are falling out on their own, but the ones that don't, I'll be able to just hit them with a punch, or well, that's the easiest way, is just to put a punch on there and hit them with a hammer. They'll knock right out. Now this X-brace, which we don't need, which is why I've welded on these extra cross members, or pieces of tubing to act as a cross member. This X-brace is going to come out, and this forward cross member is going to come out. And we're going to replace this one with a drive shaft hoop and exhaust cutouts and whatever else we need. I actually don't think it's going to need the exhaust cutouts way up here, but we'll see what we need to add to it. This we just need to get out of the way. It's just extra weight. And then we'll put just a piece of rectangular tubing or something all the way at the back. Just enough somewhere in here to give something for support back there. And then if we need to hang a fuel cell or something like that, we've gained all this space. And for now, what I need to do next, besides clean up the mess here, is pull my measurements back off all my fixed points, get my center line of my axle established on the frame rails. We'll scribe and paint that so that it's semi-permanent, and then we can take out the last of the cross members and all the brackets. I pulled a lot of my measurements off of these brackets and different cross members, so I don't want them completely out of the way until I have my scribe lines in place for the axle. And really that's the only one we need, is the center line of the axle. We can adjust for the height based on, I know that I need 25 inches from the top of the frame to the floor. Right now I'm just a hair over 27, which means we're going to be adding 2 inches, 2 1/8 inches to our ride height. So everything we measure from the ground up will add that difference from the 25 to the 27, and I'll get an exact measurement when when I'm ready to start taking measurements and marking out anything else. But for the 4-link, it's pretty simple. You just really need to know your axle center line and roughly where you want to put your forward hanger brackets for the 4-link bars. So ours need to go on the inside of the frame to allow as much room on the outside of the frame for tires. The tire size we're running is going to fit pretty easily and could probably even get the 4-link on the outside. But if he ever goes to a wider tire, he's going to need to be able to move in, because our axle is set based on the tires that we're using and the wheels that we're using. We're setting the axle length there, and we ordered an axle. What I did was clear off all the frame rails. Where the factory had a joint in the frame rail here, and there was a cross member. We had to get that cross member out of our way, so I then came back, took out the rivets, put bolts in, and then put some stitch welds along there as well. I also went back, took the big cross member out of the back of the frame, and I built a cross member and got that welded in so that we have 2 clean frame rails. Then I kind of got ahead of myself. I went ahead and put in my boxing plate on this side, and I got the one cut for the other side. It's just tacked in, thankfully, because at least one side's going to have to come out completely to give us room for what really should have been the next step. And then I'd gone ahead and put in some mounting plates to mount 4-link bars, and these had to stick out a little bit so that they would be outside of the frame rail, because the frame rail tips in at the back versus the front. It's much narrower. So I built these plates so that they would give me 2 parallel lines, and I could put my 4-link in, thinking that the mounts were going to come right off of here. And that's not the way the owner had it in his mind that it was going to be done. And he'd actually gotten a cross member to do this part that I didn't know anything about. So I'm going to be taking this plate back off, which is no big deal. We just cut the welds, and then we'll have to open up part of the boxing plate on this side. The other side, on the passenger side there, we can just remove it completely out of the way, get all our stuff done, and then put it back. And then what we're going to be using is we have a wishbone to go underneath the differential. I've got some DOM tubing so we can do an upper cross member for the top of the shocks, and then we'll do something off of the 4-link brackets for the bottom of the shocks. I just went and got these bolts, which are a 3/4 inch by 2 1/4. Undo some of the work I've already done, and then get everything set so we can put our cross member in place. So just basically catching up. What happened is I got busy, just started working, and didn't pay attention to whether I was getting any recording of all that done. So not a big deal. It's just some boxing plates, which I just made a cardboard pattern and cut out the shape by hand, and then the holes, I just threw them up on my plasma table, the plates up on my plasma table, and centered them up and had it cut the holes, and then I flared them. But what we need to do is get the cross member in place and then work on setting up our 4-link plates, the mounting plates for the link bars. So what you've been watching for the last few minutes is me widening the wheel tubs in the back of this Lightning pickup. And the owner had talked about just buying like some 6772 C10 tubs and just bolting them in. And it might have worked. There's a little bit of angles and stuff that aren't quite the same. You could, I mean, this is a drag truck. It is going to be a street legal version of a drag truck, but it's a drag truck. And hence the reason we're doing the 4-link with the wishbone and all of that. But he does plan to be able to, you know, not daily drive it, but street drive it. What I did was I just cut the original wheel well off, and I ended up only cutting off about 1.25 inches of the original wheel well, just the outside edge. When I drew a couple different lines, you saw me using, you know, a paint stick with a hole drilled in it and a Sharpie. And I marked a few different lines, and the problem I kept coming up with is that these wheel tubs are kind of wedge shaped, much like the frame of the truck is a wedge shape going to the back. The bed is actually somewhat wedge shaped. So are those wheel tubs. And so I kept having to draw new lines, trying to find something that would give me a straight line and give me the best place to put this extension panel in. So what I came up with was to cut off about 1.25 inches of the wheel tub, then cut into the floor a couple inches, move the whole thing over. So you saw me cut those 4.5-inch wide strips and then run them through the bead roller to put a step on each side. And then I just hand formed them over my leg to get the arches where they needed to be. And the first side took the longest because I had already put the outer portion of the wheel tub back in place, or I guess the inner portion, the side on the inside of the bed, back in place, and to get all my measurements. And it kind of just made it a pain in the butt to get the metal in place and weld it all up. Whereas when I did this side, now I knew the width of the strip I needed and everything else, so I just used clamps, clamped it to the inside of the bed wall there, got that side tack welded in place, then put this outer cap back in and welded it in place. Went much quicker. So that's the way I'd recommend doing it. What I really should have done over here is I had that piece tack welded in place. I should have just cut all my tack welds loose, taken that out, and done it. I just was thinking I could make it work just as easily without, but you really can't. I did have to hammer and dolly the lips. That whole thing kind of comes down at a slope. So the one on the bed wall where it comes out, I dollied that up to give me a flat surface. And then the one on the cap, if you will, where it rolls over, it was at an angle, and I dollied that over to give me a flat surface so that it kind of all tie together. It still has a little bit of a slope in it, you know, to match kind of what would have been there. But I needed some flat surfaces or level surfaces to get all my welds in. And then I took my hammer and I just used a round head somewhere. I thought I had it here. Just used a round-headed hammer and went inside the wheel well and tapped those lips flat tight against the bottom of the inside of the wheel well. And then once I have this back up on the lift, I'll go in there and stitch weld those. They don't need to be welded solid, but just stitch weld them. I've run 2 courses of beads now, or spot welds over this. It'll probably take 2 more runs. Takes about 15 minutes to do both wheel wells each time. And once they're welded up, then I can take my grinder, grind that off, and give them a pretty nice smooth surface where they can, if they want to paint it, they could put a little Bondo filler in there and then paint it, or I don't know, bed liner, whatever they're going to do. I was doing this because I was waiting on some DOM and some chromoly tubing. The carbon steel DOM got here today. The chromoly probably won't be here for another day or 2. And I only need the chromoly for the actual link bars for the 4-link. Where I put my cross member, I originally thought I was just going to put the brackets that go on the cross member right up flush against it. And I got looking at it, and I didn't like how how much weld surface you would have. So I ended up cutting notches to go around the 2x4 cross member, so that would give me a little more weld surface around the front 4-link mounts.
Well, that I ended up cutting about 1.75 inches out of the brackets, slid those on, tacked them in place. I liked the way that fit. Well, that meant my bars that I had set everything to are 2 inches or 1.75 inches too short. You know, that's on me. I could have moved the cross member, or I could have planned a little better, I guess, so that the cross member would be that 1.75 inches closer to the rear axle. So, but I found what I liked for the cross member location. I found everything fit really well, and then I just didn't like how something was going to weld in and the fit and finish there. So it's on me. Buy 8 foot of chromoly tubing, which the chromoly tubing right now is a little over $12 a foot. You know, that and the shipping to get it in. And I don't use, it's 1 3/8 95 wall, so I don't use very much of that. I don't use very much chromoly at all. You know, I just ordered 8 feet and had it'll be here, like I said, I think Friday. As far as the regular, just carbon steel DOM, that's to connect the 4-link mounts on the axle housing side, and that'll give us a place to then build some tabs off to hook our wishbone to. And also I got enough that I could make the upper shock mount. So this lower one that the wishbone will tie to will also give us a place to make some shock mounts off of. And then the upper one will go across and up over the frame. And I'm probably going to do some kind of 45 into the frame or something. And then we can make our upper shock mounts off of that. As well, as you can tell, I got really busy working and failed to do a lot of filming. So I thought I would just do an overview real quick with you of what I did, why I chose to do it the way I did, and then we'll go back to, I've got a few things I need to finish up here and on the bed floor, and we'll knock those out, and hopefully I'll be better about running the camera this time. So let's go over this. Okay, so up front here we have a 2" by 4" cross member that originally I had set at this height, which was 2 inches above the bottom of the frame rail, and it just, I really needed it lower, but going lower with where it actually needed to go would have meant the top of the cross member would have been basically welded to the bottom of the frame rail. Not particularly strong in that method, so I basically welded it in, cut it off, sectioned it down another 1.5 inches, and then 45'd everything in so that it's good and strong there, and got the cross member to a height that would work for us. Then the original design called for these brackets that
came with the 4-link kit to be welded to the outside of the frame rail. I didn't really like how that was going to work. You could have gusseted it in and made some pieces to fit it, but rather than do that, I notched them out, put those over the frame rail, and with that done, I then ordered up my 4-link bars. The kit came with some 21-inch bars. I ended up running a 24-inch on the bottom and a 23-inch on the top. Right now I've got the pinion set to 0 and the wheelbase set at the proper location. So with that part done, I was able to come back, put in this piece of 120 wall, 1.5 120 wall DOM tubing to act as a cross member. I threw a couple gussets under it and then build my shock mounts to get everything in line with the little bit of area that I had left here to clear the axle housing. We then came back and added a sway bar or anti-roll bar. That required positioning it off of this shock rail the right distance, and then I built this upper cross member to catch it vertically so that the thing can't move. They've finished up with the wishbone on the bottom, which you saw me with the axle out on the welding table. I had I'd built a bar underneath and brackets to catch the wishbone. The wishbone is in place of, say, a watch link or a panhard bar. Just keeps the axle from shifting side to side, and it is adjustable so that you can get that clearance exact. But he wants me to add backbone support to the axle housing. Well, with where I put the shock mounts, those won't fit. So what I'm going to do now is just cut the shock mounts off the top and the bottom, flip them over to the other side of this brace, and then I'll make the top ones the same length, just out here 1.5 inches, and then I'll make the bottom ones 4.5 inches longer to compensate. That'll put the shocks on the back side back here and leave room to go ahead and run these. So one more time, I'm going to take everything out and weld these onto the back brace, or weld these onto the axle housing and make the new shock mounts, but it should go pretty quickly. Mostly it'll take about an hour or a little less to cut the shock mounts that are on there off, and then about that long to weld some new ones on. Just cut them on the plasma table. Try to keep as much as possible below the height of the frame rails, just because the owner does not want to change the bed floor. We've had to cut the wheel wells out and extend those to cover the tires, but that's about the only modification, or should be the only modification we're making to the bed. This upper cross member here clears between 2 of the bed rails, the bed support rails, and is no taller than them, so it'll fit underneath the bed. Owner's still talking about bringing it back to do a full cage in it, which would come down through the windows, but they basically have to build the whole truck and know that everything fits where he wants it with the beds, because once we run the bars through the windows and it welds in, the bed's not moving again. So I think there may be some interlocking connectors that we can use in the tubes, but I don't know if they're legal for the class he wants to run. So that's something he's going to check on with his race organization. I don't know if he's doing NHRA or IHRA or who. I don't have any idea. But for now, we got the new shocks mounts in place, and cut out the lower, well, cut everything out on the plasma table, and got that welded in. All we need to do is put the spacers back on and the clips that go around everything to run the bolts down into, and the Lightning is done. It's out of here. May come back for a, I don't know, a 6, 8, 10 point, 12 point cage. I don't know, whatever the owner decides. But if it does, we'll deal with that when it gets here. For now, though, it's gone, or leaving. And thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all that other stuff. See you next time.